Hello and welcome. Here's what's coming up on Network Africa today. Outrage over farmer accused of feeding women to pigs in South Africa's Limpopo province. Ivory Coast President Alassane Ouattara's party pushes him to seek fourth presidential term. Plus, days before elections, Tunisia presidential candidate Ayachi Zamel sentenced to 12 years in prison on charges of document falsification. Hello and welcome to the program once again. I'm Anne Nwawadu. We are starting with the sad news coming from South Africa, where there is outrage over the case of two black women who were allegedly shot and fed to the pigs by a white farmer and two of his workers. Maria Magato, who's 45, and Lucien Dovu, 34, were allegedly looking for food on the farm near Polokwane in South Africa's northern Limpopo province in August when they were shot. Their bodies were then alleged to have been given to pigs in an apparent attempt to dispose of the evidence. The three men also face charges of attempted murder for shooting at Ms. Ndovulu's husband, who was with the woman at the farm, as well as a possession of an unlicensed firearm. Mabutho Nkube, who survived the ordeal on the evening of Saturday, August the 17th, crawled away and called a doctor for help. A court is now to decide whether to grant bail to the farm owner, Zachariah Jonas Olivia, who's 60, and his employees, Adrian DeWet, 19, and William Musora, 50, ahead of their murder trial. At previous hearings, protesters have demonstrated outside courts demanding that the suspects be denied bail. Away from that story, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres recently described Africa's debt situation as unsustainable and a recipe for social unrest. Speaking at the China-Africa Cooperation Summit in Beijing, he called for deep reforms to outdated, ineffective and unfair international financial system. A South Africa correspondent, Innocent Samosa, reports.
The discussion on Africa's staggering debt burdens continues to shape global discourse. Recent statistics reveals that 25 African countries are dedicating at least 10% of their revenues to debt servicing. These countries find themselves in a precarious position, prioritizing debt repayment over essential services like health and education. Meanwhile, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa says debt is limiting Africa's growth and potential.
The world faces annual financing gap of some $4 trillion to achieve sustainable development. We call on better resourced countries to scale up their levels of support to developing economic countries.
Kenyan President William Ruto speaks about biased methodology in the financial sector.
Many countries in the global south are forced to choose between buying medicine and hospital equipment or paying their debt obligations, and between buying textbooks for school-going children or paying their debt obligations.
The pressing question is, how can Africa alleviate its debt burden? I recently spoke with Professor Denny Brandlow from the University of Pretoria, who recently published an article titled Easing Africa's Debt Burden, a fresh approach based on old ideas.
I mean, as you say, the burden of the debt is becoming overwhelming for many countries. The 23 countries in Africa that are spending more money on debts, servicing their debt, than they're spending on health or education. And so, the possibility of developing in that kind of situation is extremely difficult. And so we've been looking for a way that you could the countries could be given support to work their way out of that. And the idea, we had a two-part idea. One part, which is to create a mechanism, probably in the IMF, because they probably have the access to the resources to do this.
Professor Brendlow says as the international community grapples with these challenges, the G20's current approach under the common framework raises critical questions about the future development goals and financial sustainability for low-income countries. It is clear that addressing Africa's unsustainable debt situation is critical not only for economic stability but also for social cohesion. From Johannesburg, South Africa, Innocent Samos, Channels Television News.
The top general in Sudan's army says the army will press on with its offensive despite international efforts to broker a ceasefire in the 17-month civil war. Assistant Commander-in-Chief Lieutenant General Ibrahim Gabir, who was speaking in an interview just days after the army launched an operation to regain control of the capital Khartoum from the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, the RSF. The general also hinted that the Sudanese authorities had weapons dealings with Iran and denied there is famine in the country. The two sides have now been fighting since April last year when their leaders fell out over the country's future. Ruling party in Ivory Coast have expressed its support for President Alassane Ouattara to seek a fourth term come 2025, making it more likely that the 82-year-old will run again. Mr. Ouattara, who was re-elected for a contested third term in 2020, had said he would like to step down, but also suggested he will need old rivals to commit to withdrawing from politics as well. But earlier this week, top officials of Ouattara's party, the Rally for Democracy and Peace, passed a motion expressing their desire to do everything possible to ensure that the RHDP under Ouattara's leadership becomes the undisputed winner of the next presidential election in 2025. 3 cabinet members who asked to stay anonymous said that the party had no viable candidate besides Ouattara, and one who took part in the meeting said that it had been called to convince Ouattara to stand. Ouattara has presided over relative stability during his nearly 15 years in power, but dozens of people were killed in clashes that broke close to the 2020 vote when his predecessors and long-term opponent Laurent Gbagbo and Henry Dibé also said his bid for a third term was unconstitutional. And for more on this, we now speak with Mr. Achike Chude, as an international affairs analyst, and he's speaking to us right here from Lagos. Thank you very much for joining us on Network Africa today.
Thank you very much for having me.
And now, Mr. Alassane Ouattara's team, as we know now, is now backing him for another term. What do you make of the turn of events as we speak?
Nothing strange about it. This is Africa.
You can unmute. All right.
Governance, especially the politics of governance, we begin to see all of these movements, and it's always this talk about we cannot, the country cannot afford any other person other than you. You are the most qualified. I mean, in a country of millions of people, even within the political party system, the present incumbent is the only person that is qualified. Then, what are the other members of the party doing across the nation? So it just tells you something that this is about patronage, and it is nothing new. In Africa, we've had it even in Nigeria and other African countries, where all of a sudden a strong man is said to be the only savior of the polity, and that it goes into serious instability. But it's unfortunate that the political party, his political party, has no other person that is qualified as he. He's the only one that is qualified. But it's all a gimmick, really. It's a boys' club, and that is what governance has become, really, in Africa.
Talking about governance in Africa, I mean, if we recall, it was the same thing that happened when Laurent Gbagbo was president and when Ouattara was up against him. So what does this say about the development of politics on the African continent and how we deal with politics and people that have been in power for so many years?
Yeah, well, I think it's a lack of character, the right kind of character with the right kind of values. It's a lack of the democratic ethos. They don't seem to, those who are running the show in Africa when it comes to the polity, do not seem to understand the essence of a democracy, government of the people, for the people, by the people. They do not understand the commitment, and the sense of patriotism and duty and responsibility and obligation that goes with governance in Africa. They do not seem to understand the urgency of the problems that we are facing in Africa. You just talked about in your previous news, you talked about the issue of debt being a very serious burden, where over 20 states, 20 countries are paying about over 35% of their budget, using it to service debt. And so it would appear that African political elites do not understand the gravity of the situation on ground. And of course, you quoted the United Nations Secretary General Guterres as affirming the fact that if you lead to serious social instability, if this situation persists, as it is currently doing, we can see social ultimately are due to the issue of leadership. Leadership forming economies.
Mr. Chude, if you're still there, I would like to know, for an 82-year-old running again, you'd want to ask, are there no younger people in the party? And what does this say about younger successors and how they actually come up in different parties across Africa? Because it's not just Ivory Coast. We see this happening in so many African countries. What is it about not having a more younger successor in that party?
Well, the old guys have refused to step away. They have refused to give the space, to leave the space for younger people. And perhaps it's not the problem of the old guys alone. The younger people, the younger ones are not perhaps doing enough. Look, it's all about, power play. It's all about power. And nobody gives, power, just like that without you have to fight every inch of the way to be able to get into the political space. And I think the younger ones are not exactly doing it. If they are waiting for the older generation to just up and take political power and hand it over to them like that, it's not going to happen. They have to fight for it every step of the way, at least within the bounds of constitutionalism. And unfortunately, if that does not happen, then they pave the way.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Achike Chude, International Affairs Analyst. Thanks for your contribution on Network Africa. And we head to Kenya now, where a prominent Kenyan activist, Morara Kebaso, has appeared in court on cybercrime charges for a tweet accusing President William Ruto of corruption. Mr. Kebaso, known for exposing corruption and stalled projects, was presented at the Milimani Law Court in Nairobi, Kenya, where he was released on bail for 50,000 Kenyan shillings, and that's about $387. He's due back in court later this week. One of the activist's lawyer, Eric Tuweri, claims that the charges do not amount to criminality under Kenyan law.
Maybe defamatory, but our laws do not allow for someone to be charged for making a defamatory statement. That is a realm of law that is outside the criminal processes and is a question of civil law. We have seen an increase in the cases of abduction. And in certain instances, when the police have been caught in the act, they have actually come out and said that it was not an abduction, it was actually an arrest. For example, the matter of Morara Kebaso. He was taken in a manner and commandeered in a manner similar to an abduction. But now he has been produced and they are saying they arrested him. But he is among those we consider to be lucky. There are many who have been taken in such a manner and they are unaccounted for to date.
Morara has been doing a great job exposing the stalled project around the country, debunking the lies and the corruption that's been happening for years. Okay, he has kept us at bay with the movement and kept it alive, and he's doing such a great job. That's why you're seeing all the support here.
You're watching Network Africa. Still ahead on the program. Dozens have died and 61 still missing as two boats sink off Djibouti. We'll bring you the details of this. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Let's head to Tunisia now, where days to the presidential election, a Tunisian court has sentenced presidential candidate Ayachi Zamil to 12 years in prison amid growing anger within the opposition against President Kais Saied. Mr. Zamil's lawyer, Ambassador Massoudi, said that his client had been slammed with charges of document falsification. Massoudi described the verdict as unfair and a farce, while the president's critics have accused him of using the judiciary to sideline his opponents. And this is the third prison sentence imposed on Zamil in 2 weeks. Mr. Zamil is one of just 2 candidates permitted to stand against Saied. 3 other high-profile opposition figures were barred. Mr. Zamil, who is the head of opposition Azimon Party, has been jailed since last month on charges of falsifying voter signatures on his candidacy paperwork, accusations as described as manufactured by Saied's government. He is being allowed to continue to stand in the election while in jail. But Tunisia was the only Arab country to emerge with a peaceful democracy from the year 2021 Arab Spring, the famous protest against autocratic rulers across the Middle East and in North Africa. But since being elected in 2019, Mr. Saied has gradually amassed great powers, arguing that he needs them to combat a corrupt elite. He dissolved the elected parliament, began ruling by decree in 2021, a move the opposition has described as a coup. At least 45 people have died and many others are still missing after 2 migrant boats capsized off the coast of Djibouti. The boats left Yemen with 310 people on board before sinking in the Red Sea off the East African nation on Tuesday. This is the latest boat disaster to hit the route, described as one of the busiest and most dangerous in the world, used by refugees and migrants from Africa. 115 survivors have been rescued after a large-scale search, which began on Monday this week. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and his Moroccan counterpart Nasser Bourita met in Washington on Tuesday amid rising tensions in the Middle East. Both leaders exchanged views on developments in North Africa and, of course, in the Middle East. Blinken told reporters that the U.S. will keep working on de-escalating the conflict in that region. Ties between Washington and Rabat have improved significantly since the United States supported Morocco's claim over West Sahara in December 2020. The recognition was slammed by Western Sahara, Polisario Front, and Algeria, and in exchange for this, Morocco agreed to normalize relations with Israel. Years of conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo has seen civilians suffer horrific violence, including killings, rape, kidnappings, and torching of homes, all perpetrated by non-state armed groups. The fighting has displaced over 6.4 million people in the country, forcing families to seek safety in overcrowded sites. The UN Refugee Agency is now warning that prolonged conflict and human rights violations are unleashing grave suffering on internally displaced Congolese. Assistant High Commissioner for Protection, UNHCR, Ruven Madikela, gave an address from the USA tent on site at Goma.
This morning, we spoke to this woman who has 5 young children. She walked 2 weeks to get to this site. She's still waiting for services. She's still waiting for her children who are apparently ill to be treated. She's still waiting for food. And I realized that this is fairly typical of all of these people living in this site. They all have their individual tragedies. So they're not just a number. They're literally, individual stories behind each one of these numbers, and individual tragedies and prolonged tragedies as well, because we don't really see a solution in sight. So all the parties should come to the table and should negotiate a peace, to give peace a chance, so that all of these people, all of these literally millions of people who are displaced can actually find their way back home or be integrated where they are, and to be able to live peacefully together in one community.
Basketball fans in Congo's capital, Kinshasa, are mourning the loss of NBA legend Dikembe Mutombo, remembering him as an icon and inspiration for Congolese youth. Mutombo, a Hall of Famer known for his shot-blocking prowess and charitable work, died from brain cancer on Monday, September the 30th, at the age of 58. At a local basketball court adorned with the NBA logo, players gathered to pay tribute to their hometown hero. Mutombo's impact extended beyond his on-court achievements, inspiring a generation of Congolese basketball players. His legacy as an 8-time NBA All-Star and 4-time Defensive Player of the Year continues to resonate in his home country, where he remains a symbol of Congolese success on the global stage. And finally on the program, back in South Africa, Loyiso Manga has been producing Ubuntu olive oil since 2019. What's remarkable about this enterprise is that it's one of the few Black-owned companies in olive industry in South Africa. You can see some of his products stocked in Woolworths, one of South Africa's prestigious retailers.
Fed up with his call center job, Loyiso Manga set his sights on becoming one of South Africa's first Black olive oil producers. He struggled to buy a farm because he could not secure funding, but eventually found a partner who supplies him with olive oil, which he blends into his own signature product. Manga's brand has started to take off, with bottles of his olive oil stocked by upmarket South African retailer Woolworths.
Part of the challenge is the slow or the lack of political will to say, here is a Loyiso. We know Loyiso's started his brand in 2019, but why are we not pushing this guy? Because this is what the dream of Nelson Mandela, transformation, and what our people want to get into.
He wants to see more support from the government so emerging Black farmers can help broaden olive oil's appeal locally.
We don't have a warehouse nor a farm, but that just goes to prove that the market is there. We just need to now own the value chain.
South Africa's Western Cape province, with its Mediterranean climate, is ideal for olive farming, but it is a capital-intensive process, with farmers needing to wait for 4 to 5 years before their olive trees produce the yield needed for a harvest.
Loyiso is one of the Black-owned companies we've got in the olive industry, and I really salute Loyiso for coming into an industry that is really white-dominated. It had to take a remarkable person to achieve what he's achieved. He's got a beautiful product, and we now, as the association, together with Loyiso and also the commercial farms and land bank, need to see how can we support Loyiso in getting access to land, getting the capital required for him to grow his business, because he's already done the hard work. He's got the brand on retail shelf. It's now getting him further down the value chain to primary production so that we can make sure that whatever Loyiso builds in terms of growth for his brand, that he can supply the demand.
Experts say the heat waves across Europe have led to lower production volumes and increased the opportunity for farmers in South Africa, which they can tap with support from the government. South Africa imports about 5 to 6 million liters of olive oil every year. More locally produced olive oil will align with job creation and provide opportunities to expand the industry.
Well, opportunities abound everywhere, and that's where we draw the curtains in this edition of Network Africa on Channels Television. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Anne Mwawadu.